Hi, thanks so much for watching this video. It's part of the Culture and Adoption Project through Together for Adoption. Today we're going to dig a little bit into cultural bereavement and how that translates in the process of foster care or adoption. Cultural bereavement is essentially what happens to any individual, whether they're a child or an adult, when they transition from one culture to another. We end up having this sense of loss, things that we've left behind. Doesn't mean anything is bad or wrong, but there are losses to be grieved. In the case of a child, when they're transitioning cultures, there are so many different elements that make this a very challenging process. Folks who transition cultures while they're still young, while they're still developing, tend to end up with symptoms of unresolved or disenfranchised grief throughout their lives. So one thing we can do here at the Culture and Adoption Project is help equip you guys to engage with your kids and their grief and their losses, and maybe help navigate some of those things that make it uniquely challenging for kids who are being fostered or adopted. So let's try for a second before we even jump in to put yourself in your child's shoes. In one plane ride or in one car ride, they are losing absolutely everything they've known up until this point in their life. We're talking about, stuffed animals, relationships they've had, whether those were functional or not, all the people they know, the landscape, the environment, the structures, the systems, the schools, everything that they've known up to this point is now suddenly shifted. And all of that happens in an instant and it's gone. And if that happened for us as an adult, everyone around us would take a second and pause and grieve with us about all those losses. But uniquely for kids who are coming into adopted or foster care homes, generally this transition is celebrated, as it should be. But that creates a very confusing environment for a child who's experiencing loss that is then being celebrated by those around them. The answer here is not stop celebrating the beautiful gift that is adoption and foster care. But we do have to create space for what this transition is like for a child. We have to give them the freedom to grieve their losses without feeling threatened by that, and grieve losses that we see as positive or negative. Doesn't matter how dysfunctional or hard the place they're coming from was, it was home. And that's a loss that has to be grieved. It doesn't matter our perception of it as an adult. Some of the things that make this hard for kids is that there are so many hidden losses associated with transitioning cultures. That makes it really hard to grieve because there's this constant sense of confusion inside of the individual about whether or not their loss is valid. When you're thinking about your child coming into your home, it may help to take a minute and think through everything that has been lost for them in this process. Losses of people, losses of places, losses of pets, losses of possession, loss of security. Knowing the world around you, knowing how it operates, gives you a sense of security. It lets you know how to engage with people when you see them in the grocery store. You know the societal rules of how that works, and that place becomes safe. When you don't know those rules and when they change on you, all of a sudden you have this loss of security. Loss of belonging. So much of our sense of belonging comes from having other people reflect back to us where we fit in within our society. A lot of times kids who transition cultures in their youth will end up saying as adults they never feel at home anywhere. They can feel homesick even within their family. There's always this sense of, I had another place somewhere once where I belonged, and I don't know how to get back there. One of the other reasons it becomes challenging to navigate cultural bereavement with kids is because grief for children looks so different than it does for adults, right? We are able to articulate our feelings sometimes. We're able to ask for help. We're able to reach out. We're able to explain the loss. Even if we feel like it's not valid, we can sometimes articulate that. Children don't tend to have those social skills or abilities. They may appear from the outside to lack feelings about the loss, or you may see them exhibit strong grief in moments and then the next moment just go back to being fine. It's important to remember that grieving for children, just like for adults, is a process that takes years. They may only be able to articulate it later in life, and that then will give freedom to those feelings that they haven't been able to let out. Another distinction with children and adults in grief is that, adults may be uncomfortable sharing their feelings with a stranger, while a child may feel totally comfortable just walking up to an adult and saying their feelings or what they're wrestling with. And part of the reason they're doing that is to gain social cues from that adult on how they should feel about what's happening to them. So in these situations, it's really important that we resist the temptation either to belittle that grief, belittle that loss, or out of a need to protect our child, try to turn them to something more positive, There are so many positive elements that your child is going to experience, but the safety to grieve, the safety to feel lost without receiving the social cue that maybe they're just feeling that loss because they're not looking on the bright side or because they're missing something, can sometimes be really troubling or challenging for a child. And children can sometimes ask really hard questions that we're not ready to answer, that may not be appropriate to answer. And so as a parent, as a family, you guys have to figure out how you want to navigate those questions in a way that's going to set you up to not invalidate the question itself. Other factors that might affect the kind of cultural bereavement you're going to see from your kid are going to be the age of the child, the stage of development they're at, their personality, their previous experiences with loss, and previous narratives that have been given to them around loss, previous narratives that have been provided to them around emotion. That's all part of the culture they came from. There might be a different cultural understanding of emotion. Your family's cultural environment is going to be a huge part about how your child is going to be able to grieve. So it might be good to take a little reflection time and think through, how does our family view emotions? How does our family engage with them? How does our family engage with grief and loss in general? Are there certain losses that we validate and certain losses we don't? And we'll have a whole nother tool on how to engage your own family culture and understand it coming up here next week. And just, really quickly, I'm going to give a high level of how grief might look at different stages of development. So even with infants, so often when we talk about adoption or foster care, people presume if they adopted an infant, they don't have to think about any of this stuff. But the reality is infants experience loss. They are aware of that sense of separation, of the anxiety around it. Children who've experienced loss and separation may be sluggish and quiet. They may be less responsive to a smile or a coo. They may have physical symptoms such as weight loss and may sleep less. And it's important to keep in mind that all of this may be a part of processing grief. When your kids get a little older, if you're working with a 2 or a 3-year-old, this may play out as anxiety, maybe a general overall sense of distress. They may stop talking. Your child at 3 to 6 is starting to develop why. They want to make sense of not just the experiences they've had in the past, but the experiences they're having in the present. Why do they feel sad when everyone around them says this is such a great thing? Why is that tension of loss and celebration happening in their lives? They may have trouble eating and sleeping, controlling their bladder and bowel if they're grieving at this age. If your kids are in age range 6 to 9, here's what grief might look like for them. They may become afraid of school. They may have learning problems. They may show antisocial or even aggressive behavior. They may become worried about their own health, loss, relationships, friendships. They may withdraw from others, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, sometimes they become overly attached and overly clingy. Again, culture and the culture they're entering into, both within your family, within their classroom, within their neighborhood, is going to affect this a lot. If kids feel unsafe to experience sadness, if sadness is an emotion that is somehow stigmatized, then generally it comes out as anger. So you may see acting out in the classroom, aggressive behavior, that kind of thing. When your child is 9 or older, when they're experiencing grief, they're going to have some of those stronger emotions like guilt and anger and shame, anxiety over loss and separation. You may see a lot of fear of rejection and that tension with their peers. You may see changes in eating habits, sleeping problems, regressive behavior, or impulsive behavior. So if you're engaging with kids who have some of these symptoms of grief, just try to make room, make space in your family for all emotions, for senses of sadness and loss. Talk about sadness and loss. Be willing to go to the hard places. And I know that it can be really painful and really threatening when someone feels sad about something that you were involved with. But it's really important that you just plant your feet really firmly in your identity in Christ and know that this isn't an accusation. It's not a failure of you as a parent. You're just dealing with another human being, another brother or sister in Christ who's been hurt by the world we live in. And you can enter into that pain with them, grieve with them, link arms with them in the pain and walk through it. Thank you for being a part of this Culture and Adoption project. Coming up soon, we're going to do a couple more videos and resources on your own family's culture environment and how to identify that, as well as the other symptoms of cultural displacement in childhood that might be helpful tools for you. Together for Adoption, as a part of this Culture and Adoption project, is also offering 4 free coaching sessions. So thanks. You guys have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.